Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Milrad. I'm the founder of Movie Karma. We're the nonprofit organization here in the United States that created our podcast, Rewriting Hollywood, focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as representation and social impact in Hollywood. Really looking at the power of storytelling and how it can be a force for social change and for social good around the world. And today I'm excited to have another very special guest joining us who is Oscar nominated for his film, House Made of Splinters. His name is Simon Lereng Wilmont. It's a powerful film, a documentary that really looks at children and staff in a special kind of home in Eastern Ukraine, a place where children who have been removed from their homes while waiting court custody decisions in the midst of ongoing war and conflict around them. I know Simon's been working in this part of the world and on this issue for many, many years. And so in light of course, what's been happening in Ukraine and nearby Russia and that region, I'm excited to talk to him and hear, of course, how everything is going there and in terms of the folks that he worked with, but also hear about his work and what drew him to this project. So Simon, it's a real honor having you on. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So to dive right in, Simon, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're yourself an award-winning filmmaker. Your last project, The Distant Barking of Dogs, was obviously connected to this theme in this part of the world, working with children. What inspired you, backing up before that, to become a filmmaker, and specifically, why were you interested in documentary filmmaking?
Well, from very early on, I got totally in love with photography, and I thought that I was going a completely different direction. So I started university and actually got a bachelor in Japanese. But while doing the Japanese, we had to do a course, 1-year course that didn't have anything to do with Japanese at all. And because I was late, the only thing that was left was visual and auditive anthropology. And there, that's when they introduced me to documentary filmmaking, and I lost my heart to it because it's so much larger than life. It's larger than fiction. You can do things happen in documentaries which you would find improbable in fiction,
Yeah, absolutely. That you wouldn't expect and maybe couldn't script as well as they happen. So what was that early journey for you like after you fell in love with documentary filmmaking, Simon? Like, did you start making shorts, documentary shorts? How did you start getting into that space?
Yeah, at that point in time, cameras was something very precious, and so was the editing stations. I'm that old, so it was quite a hassle getting your hands on it. You had to beg, borrow, and steal to be able to make stuff. So that's what you did, and yeah, usually in the beginning it took a while before I started, venturing into feature-length documentary. It wasn't until after film school.
Wow. Okay. And then to get your first, fully funded documentary made, or to be able to do that first bigger project, were you able to get, mentors or funding from, I understand you're overseas. So for American audiences, there might've been some different resources, hopefully, that you were able to access, but what was that like? How did you go about that?
Well, the Danish film system is a very privileged one, to be honest. And once there's so few of us who actually comes out from film school every second year, it's only 6 directors. Wow. So obviously we have kind of like a good way into making films, because we have the Danish Film Institute, which supports documentaries also, and in various stages. So there's different sizes of which you can apply for, and that's usually how you get a project running.
Yeah, it's something I've been advocating for here in the US. I mean, we just met with some Canadian filmmakers who are Oscar nominated, who had their work funded by their national film board, and so it sounds like you were able to really get those early resources from that publicly funded, I imagine, resource.
Exactly. And then you, as your idea develops and you find your characters, that's when, the responsibilities and the asks for more money, that become a little bit more difficult. And that's usually also when you have to go out into the world, the US or or Europe or other places to start talking to commissioning editors and to piece, this quilt of a budget together, which a feature-length documentary film is.
Right, and then from there you have to obviously bring all those pieces together, get it fully funded, and then make it. So still not easy, but maybe you had hopefully some support there to do it.
Yeah, no, I was so lucky. So I started in Sinebio Samson and Joshua Oppenheimer's company, Final Cut for Real, and as you can probably imagine, they're really well connected. So the commissioning editors, I guess, I don't know, but I would guess that they lend them a little bit of an extra ear when they present projects. So me and Monica we were fairly well greeted from the very beginning, actually.
That's fantastic, yeah, and hopefully inspiring to younger filmmakers listening to this about finding your path by any means that you can. Let's talk about how you got into this topic specifically, because I know your last project, The Disembarking of Dogs, was deeply connected to the similar region here in Eastern Ukraine and working with children and who were affected by conflict and war there, even before, obviously, the most recent invasion by Russia. Tell us a little bit, if you would, Simon, about how this topic or this part of the world interested you. Like, what was that process like for you?
Honestly, it's because before The Disembarking of Dogs, which was my previous film, before that film, I had made 2 short documentaries for kids about kids. And when I was done with these 2 films, I took a step back and I looked at them, and it occurred to me, both of these films are about a child who has a very safe world, and that world is knocked temporarily out of balance, and they're trying to get, that safe world back again. And it dawned on me there were so many conflicts going on at the world at that point in time. And I started thinking so much about if you're a child in a conflict zone, you must have the exact opposite world where your everyday life is full of uncertainty and maybe even physical danger. So where do you go to find that comfort, which I feel you need to grow up as a person without too many scars on your soul? And that's what led me to Ukraine in the very beginning.
Interesting. So you were drawn to this, it sounds like, and what did you learn? I mean, those earlier days of even making your last project, Disembarking of Dogs, what did you start to learn about how children do cope with or experience their lives in these conflict zones? Because I think what you're alluding to, which we see in your projects, is children's ability to find beauty and joy in places that we as adults maybe would not be able to find. What did you start to see or notice?
One of the most magical things to discover is exactly that kids are super good at making their lives interesting and magical, despite hardcore circumstances surrounding them. As long as they're allowed to stay, children or the adults around them stay at least in the semblance of control. They can be scared also, but they should never show it to kids. And also they should be very honest with the kids. This creates that kind of comfort that lets the child maneuver in this world. And what happens when the war suddenly comes in and shatters your little, almost soap bubble of a beautiful world? You live through it. Hopefully your caretakers can shield you from the worst of it, but the beautiful part actually is afterwards, when the war has gone away again, they are the quickest to start building up that bubble of normalcy and that bubble of childhood again. And I thought that's so inspiring.
Yeah, the ability to bounce back somehow and to find even levity or joy again, or magic again, as you said, is pretty incredible that children seem to have that ability. Why did you feel like you were drawn to specifically focus on children? Was it because in part of those qualities that kids have, or did part of you also feel, I mean, to some extent, as I feel, maybe a lot of folks feel, that children in war zones and conflict zones don't get enough attention. I mean, it just seems like at least the media tends to focus in the US on, the kind of chessboard, if you will, of sort of who's invading who's bombing who, what's going on, but not really thinking about the children or the lives that are being impacted.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer it like, but to a full. But
yeah.
Part of it I was really fascinated by how you, as a young, not fully grown person, how do you perceive something as adult, as a war going on in your backyard? In how does it register in your world, and what are your feelings and thoughts about it? I think that point of view, that innocence, looking at something really scary and trying to deal with that, I think that's a very dramatic and a very drawing story.
Yeah, it is. I mean, how do they, as very young people, manage that? And so in the latest film, A House Made of Splinters, we see you're sort of set in this kind of provincial town in eastern Ukraine. We see these kids in this institution where they're already from unstable households, like something's already happened at home where they have parents who can't care for them or a parent who can't care for them, and they're sheltered here in this space, in this institution, for up to 9 months, as it's sort of like their future is being decided and what happens next. So what was that experience like for you, and what was the story that was emerging as you started to sort of film these kids in this environment, particularly with this film?
What became apparent to me throughout the course of this film was, how the long-term, much more invisible, but no less dire consequences that having a war in your backyard does to a society. When you're living with a war so close to where you live, the first thing that happens, and what's going to happen for the next large amount of time, is that all resources slowly drain from this area, and that's both financial, but also emotional. Businesses shut down, people lose their job, they have no savings, they're poor in the beginning, and now they're even more poor. There is no way to go. You can't just up and go anywhere. So you're kind of stuck there, and at some point in time, even the strongest might even start to have one beer too many, and all of a sudden you're addicted, or maybe even you're the father of your children is too violent, and tensions rise. It's people, and it's always, in the end, it's always the children that suffers. They are the ones that are taking the biggest of the pain in the end.
Right. There's kind of maybe ironically, or essentially carrying the as you said, kind of the heaviness and the burden of a lot of this. And these kids particularly who were displaced already, and then they're displaced again. And in terms of finding your subjects here, I understand there are certain children that I think you've said you were kind of drawn to, or you felt like you wanted to tell their story specifically. What about them, Simon, like drew you to those kids specifically, and why did you want to tell certain? Because I imagine you had to kind of select who you wanted to follow, and why do you think that unfolded in that way?
It's mostly also in the beginning. It starts with that they're also curious as to who me and my Ukrainian assistant director is. Are they curious? Are they open-minded? Are they like up for new what do you call it, impressions and the wind from the outside and from foreign countries? Mm-hmm. But with for example Yeva, what kind of made me start to look a little bit more in her was partly her eyes, which could contain so much joy but also so much sorrow. And I kept noticing that she was doing those cartwheels even though if she was happy, she did them. If she was sad, she did them. But it seemed to have different reasons behind for it. She was like cartwheeling her way out of sorrow, or she was cartwheeling because she couldn't contain her joy, and that kind of like made me start to look a little bit more at her. With Sasha, it was in the beginning because she reminded me, to be honest, about my younger cousin. But also because when she came to Margarita's shelter, she, as opposed to a lot of the other kids I'd seen come in, was not, that didn't seem terribly afraid or terribly sad, but more struck with wonder, like she was walking in her own little world, really curious as what is this place, you know, ready to discover it. And she felt so strong, but also like a contained little world, which wasn't letting anybody else in. And then, of course, Kolya, he reminded me of a lot of my friends and the guys that I hung out with when I was his age, you know, guys that are maybe a little bit hoodlums, but you know for sure that you're going to be on adventures with them, and there are always something interesting going on when you're hanging out. Yeah, there's always some shit. And that, and that actually also contrasted with, you know, the tenderness and the love and the care that he would show the next moment towards his two younger siblings. I thought that contrast was so fascinating. Yeah, it really is. And you get sort of, all these sides of these emerging young people, kindness, but also, like you said, kind of shenanigans and the playfulness and kind of everything in between. And so, like, as you were, you know, in this physical location, I saw you said with your last film, even, you know, you kind of, it almost sounded like you were describing it as there's a sense of serenity or quietness at first, and then you realized, you know, oh, this is an actual conflict. You know, it's definitely a conflict zone. Like it's dangerous. It's scary. Like, talk about just the physical, I guess, dangerousness or safety issues that come up with not only you filming there, but also for these children. I mean, what was that daily experience like? Honestly, the Margarita's shelter is located, at that point in time, it was located 20 kilometers from the front line, and the front line wasn't moving so much. Okay, good. Yeah, you would hear the cannons on clear days, like a strange thunder on a summer morning, you know, but not so that you would get scared about it. And a lot of these kids has long, you know, been used to these sounds. So for most part of them, if they don't change the sounds, they don't really register them anymore. And the same with the society around them. So in this film, as opposed to my previous film, the war was not so much present as a brutal, constant force that would interject into their lives. Good. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear that you were aware of it, but not immersed in it. I understand, of course, that the war did come to this region, of course, with the Russian invasion. And I understand, heard from the community and the staff you were working with when this occurred, that there was an evacuations that occurred, and increased hostilities were happening, of course, and as the invasion unfolded. What was that experience like for you? I mean, as I think you described that you were not there when that occurred. So I imagine it must have been a bit of a strange experience, and although you wanted to help as much as you could. Yeah, the 24th of February was a nightmare. There's so many people I know in the eastern part of Ukraine, and obviously it's frustrating not being able to be there and be able to do anything, you know. And I was keep getting texts from all over, you know, this one is okay, this one is probably not okay, and it didn't take long though before somebody, you know, let me know that very early in the morning the kids had been put on trains and had been ridden westwards. But that journey lasted 3 days which would normally be a one-day journey, because the train had to stop because of shelling along the way. So I can't imagine how horrible and how terrible that journey must have been for the kids. But they got to the western part of Ukraine and even further into Europe, some of them, and they're safe now. So we can count our blessings on that one.
Did that spark in you? Because always something I wonder with documentary filmmakers, particularly, I mean, the same question might be asked of journalists or others in terms of what you feel like your responsibility is to the lives and the subjects that you know are working with. In this case, obviously, children who are particularly vulnerable. How did that did what ultimately happen, and the kids being evacuated and their lives at risk, did that affect how you see documentary filmmaking or your responsibility within this work?
It's impossible for us, both me and the rest of the Ukrainian crew, I think, not to become very close to these kids and not wanting to do something for them. So we had actually, before the war came, we had actually set up a super good system which was working actually to really good results, where we had employed 2 psychologists that would be available for the kids if they wanted to talk at any point in time. And they were actually reaching out, talking to the psychologist. But obviously, with a full-scale war breaking out in the country, this system is struggling, you know, and it took us some time. And it was, I have to credit, you know, Lena and Asad, my 2 Ukrainian colleagues. They made an amazing work in reestablishing this system, and they're actually now running an NGO which is taking care of all vulnerable kids in Ukraine, and we've been trying to get as much funding for their organization as possible.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would love to see how, you know, if you want to share that information, let us see how we can promote that. What do you think on that point is I mean, there's so much, I imagine, but is remarkable about particularly the Ukrainian culture, the Ukrainian ethos. I mean, I think the world, myself included, has been so struck by the strength and the fortitude with which the Ukrainian people have responded, including children, of course, that are there, to something that is, I mean, from our perspective, of course, entirely unprovoked, undeserved, and downright cruel that the Russian invasion has brought on. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is there something that is in the water, so to speak, there that just gives the certain fortitude to the people there?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the Ukrainians I know are super strong people. They're used to adversity, and they're used to overcoming adversity also. And one way, at least that's my personal point of view of how they do this, is they're very good at making jokes and making light of what troubles them, to sort of as a coping mechanism, and it helps them to get over it and to, you know, to do something about it, you know, tomorrow, right? So yeah, this is super strong people, and I'm sure that as soon as they kick the Russians out, which they will, it's just a matter of time, there's going to be a rebuilding that we have never seen before.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be an extraordinary thing to see, and I also believe it will absolutely happen. In terms of the children here, I mean, obviously you've now worked with children for a number of years. They're, I'm sure, coming into adulthood, you know, in some ways, and will soon, of course. How do you think this is as you're in touch with them, if you are, but even if you got back in touch with them, how do you think this experience and these experiences in total have impacted them? I mean, what do you think their futures look like into adulthood?
I think that they need as much help as they can get. But I'm also confident that with that help, they can actually be brought to a place where they can become really good adults. What worries me the most is that, you know, I've been spending time in the eastern Ukraine where the war was creating a lot of pressure on the small societies, and now it's the front line is not only in East Ukraine anymore, it's all over the country. So now we're talking about a whole country full of kids, obviously also, who are suffering due to this terrible war of Russia. So I think that Ukraine will be needing as much help and support as they can get for a really good amount of years from here to and now on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as do kids, I'm sure, and all around the world, they face conflict and grow up in conflict. And we certainly have a whole country here, to your point, that is felt that. What do you feel like, Simon, is the responsibility, if any, of the world or of our listeners, for example, to try to provide that support? I mean, we are fortunate for the most part in the U.S., obviously, to not. We have our share of challenges, but to not have open conflict in war zones like that. So I wonder if there are families listening or parents listening or others, like what do you feel like we all can do, if anything, to help support?
I think it's important to give when you can give, but not to over give either, if that's a word, but to keep it more like a slow and steady stream instead of maybe a bit too much in a one-time present. It will take a lot of time, and it will take support throughout a generation, I think, for that country to be able to rebuild itself. But they're also very good at making do with what they got and what they have. So I remain really optimistic. Maybe a little bit naively so, but I remain really optimistic.
Yeah, no, Sam, I that's good to hear, that having been so close to these children and these subject, that you feel so hopeful. I guess one of my last questions is just the flip side of that question, which is, what lessons do you feel like we can draw? What things do you think we can learn from your experience, your film, these children, but just sort of the people that you worked with, and are there things that we can draw from their experience to maybe bring into our own lives and make the world a little bit better where we are?
It's the relationships that we surround with us and that we form. That's the thing that helps us through tragedy. It's so much harder on your own, but if you have loving, supporting people around you, and you're good at giving back, and you're leaning on each other, that's the way to get through any crisis.
Yeah, beautifully said. We could definitely use more of that, especially these days. Well, I guess my last question then, Simon, is just like, what's your hope for the kinds of projects you want to do next? And are you looking to go back to Ukraine and kind of continue to follow these young folks as they grow up, or where do you want to put your lens next?
Honestly, I haven't really had so much time to consider this. It's been a really hard year. I think intuitively, I think that this is such a violent and such a forceful and important chapter in the story of Ukraine. And I know so many really talented Ukrainian filmmakers. I think this is their story to tell in this point in time. I might go back in a lot of years maybe to do something, because I love that country. But for now, I think this is their time.
Yeah, beautifully said. And it goes to that kind of the notion of agency and kind of who gets to tell which stories. So it's a keen self-awareness on your part. Well, it was a real honor having you on, Simon. Again, the film is A House Made of Splinters. Congratulations on the Oscar nomination, and excited to see obviously how that unfolds, but more importantly, what your next steps are. And I hope more folks will have a chance to see the film and so it can have an even bigger impact.
Yeah, I think there's rumors going around that it will actually be on some streaming service, or at least possible online very soon.
Good. Yeah, I was going to ask you that. It's good to hear. It deserves as wide a distribution as it can get. So again, yeah, thank you so much, Simon, for taking the time.
Thank you for having us.